And yeah, thanks to the Friends of St. Peter's for inviting me to give you a presentation this evening. I'm a Regeneration project manager at the Churches Conservation Trust, and my main responsibility is the Regeneration project that we're undertaking at St. Peter's and the Old Black Lion. So this evening, my talk's in 4 parts. The first section will be very much about the history of the Old Black Lion pub, and those sections, a lot of credit goes for the original research done by Jen Dedman, who's our historic building specialist, who's been working on the project, and also the Friends of St. Peter's Marefair, who I know have been sending Jen lots of information, and whose enthusiasm for the site and for Northampton's heritage more widely has really, really supported this project. So there'll be a section on the history, and that's not just for entertainment. The Regeneration project is absolutely a heritage-led project, and so our understanding of the history of this site, of the pub, very much feeds into what we aspire to achieve there for the future. After I do the history, I'll have a brief look at the situation today, some of which you can see from the photograph that's up on the screen at the moment, and some of the issues that we're attempting to address through the project. And then the more interesting and exciting bit, I hope, we'll look to the future and what we're seeking to achieve and how we're going to go about it. And then just at the end, I'll offer some glimpses of some of the things we've discovered very recently with contractors on site at the Old Black Lion, hopefully satisfying the last bit of my title, the Old Black Lion Revealed, because we have got some new things to show you. So without further ado, we'll take a deep dive into history and back to 1611 and John Speed's map of Northamptonshire. I think this is important, setting the context of the medieval town in which St. Peter's Church was built. And if you can see my cursor, there's St. Peter's just there, marked with an S, and also in which the Old Black Lion emerged on the site next to St. Peter's. The medieval town is dominated by its 2 main centres, the castle, as I'm sure all of you Northamptonians are well aware, and the market square with All Hallows Church, as it was known then, and now All Saints. And these 2 sort of separate poles have really influenced the history of St. Peter's and the Old Black Lion. But certainly in the first part of its history, the site was very much in the zone of the castle, and as Jean said, it was the lords of the castle who initially sponsored the building work at St. Peter's. But St. Peter's isn't just a medieval foundation. We know from the archaeological excavations that took place to the east of the church in the 1980s that there was a massive and important Saxon palace on the site. And that's area, and indeed the area around the churchyard and south of our site on the Old Black Lion, is a scheduled ancient monument because of that importance. And that's another thing we've been taking into account as part of our project. Sorry, Donna, I think your microphone is still on, and if you wouldn't mind switching it off, I think it would help others to be able to hear. I don't know if you can hear me, Donna, but if you can, and if you could mute yourself, that would be great. So moving into a bit of detail of the Old Black Lion, the site faces Marefair, which I'm just showing up with my cursor, goes along here, and this is the pub. And in the medieval period, it's likely that this was 2 or perhaps even 3 separate plots. And then for most of its history, the pub was this section here, a sort of L-shaped building. And then there was a separate tenement or a cottage building next to it. And in the existing pub, that's the little building in white that's to the right of the main photo I showed you. And in common with lots of medieval buildings, it had a narrow frontage to the street, medieval urban buildings, that is, and then behind associated outbuildings, in this case here, or a yard, for sort of lots of commercial and industrial activities that would take place in a medieval town. This plan here is a plan of the modern building, or the building that exists today, and then overlaid in blue are what we think are the earliest parts of our building. And we think that they date to at least the 16th century, these sections in blue here. And what's quite interesting about them is, as you can see here, there's a very clear mark in the stonework along this blue line, and you can see the detail of it there. That suggests two different phases of building. And our buildings archaeologist thinks that that might hint at the fact that in its earliest incarnation, the old Black Lion pub could have been a half timbered building. So it had a stone base on the ground floor and was half timbered above, as was a timber frame building above, as was very common for many buildings in the medieval period. There was a big fire in Northampton in 1516, and it might have been at that point that the second phase of building, the rebuilding of the timber frame bit in a stone, in a different stone, or the same type of stone but slightly different way it's been put together, might have taken place again in the 16th century. The other two things in blue, which remain with us today and which we're keen to preserve here and here, are huge chimney stacks, again possibly dating to the 16th century or earlier. So moving on a bit, the frontage of the building that you see from the street today, and that's shown in red on this plan here, dates to the early to mid 18th century, when it was rebuilt, when it was refronted. Not uncommon in the 18th century, rather than tearing a whole building down when you wanted a new look, was to simply put a new facade on it. A bit of the reverse of the thing that you see nowadays, where perhaps a developer might keep a historic facade and build a new building behind. In the 18th century, it tended to work the opposite way around. So you can see that the 18th century sections in red here, and get some sense of what the building was like inside in the 18th century. The two black areas here show big chimney stacks, again, providing warmth to these little parlours or rooms in the pub. And we know that by the 18th century, it was a pub, because that's the first mention that we have of it being a public house in 1722, when the Northamptonshire Mercury advertised a horse for sale at the Black Lion in Northampton. So that's the first archival reference to the building. Note it was called the Black Lion in 1722 and not the Old Black Lion. There's another reference in 1729 when there was a cockfight advertised at the pub. So that's cockerels fighting and people betting on who's going to win. Cockerels owned a cock match between Sir Arthur Hazelrigg and Charles Gore, Esquire, MP, it reported in the newspaper. And note in the advertisement, it said there will also be a very good ordinary. An ordinary was food and drink served at the bar. So it's definitely serving purposes of hospitality by this point in the 1720s. There's another quite substantial account of the building in the paper in 1771, and that's the first detailed description we have of what the Old Black Lion was like at that time. This described that large, old and well-accustomed inn, known by the name or sign of the Black Lion, near St. Peter's Church, containing a convenient kitchen, a large hall, 4 parlours, 3 pantries, a large vault and cellars, stabling for up to 20 horses. So to give a bit of colour to that description, I've got some images here of historic coaching inns that have survived to a little bit of a greater extent than the Old Black Lion, have suffered fewer alterations. These are examples in Oxfordshire, in Gloucestershire and in Somerset. And they give us a little bit of an understanding about what the pub must have been like in the 17th, 18th centuries. So like at the Old Black Lion, you would have come in from the main street through an open sort of carriageway into a cobbled yard. The main public bars would be on the first floor, nearest the street, and above there are often rooms for hire. Often these were accessed, as here, by external staircases, and that was definitely the case at the Old Black Lion. There's no evidence of any internal staircases in the long east range. And then towards the back of the yard, there would have been stabling for horses, and we know that that was the case at the Old Black Lion. The example in Gloucester in the bottom left is of 3 stories, a timber frame building I guess because it's a very dense urban environment, so they needed to build up these slightly more rural examples at Mells in Somerset and here at Farringdon. And this one is probably the one that most closely resembles what the old Black Lion might have been like before the 19th century. On to the 19th century, and this map shows the area around the old Black Lion on the cusp of the great changes that came about in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution. At this point, the castle mound is still really easily discernible in the town. The development of the town doesn't really extend much beyond it, and beyond the river, there are meadows and pasture. Because of this, the old Black Lion was a little bit out on a limb, away from the main town centre, and the great activity that was represented at the castle in the medieval period, in the Middle Ages, has of course dissipated by this stage. And consequently, this had a big impact on the business of the pub. That description I gave you before from 1771 was so detailed because at that point the pub was up for sale. It was put on the market for subsequent 5 years. Each year it was in the newspaper, for the last time in 1776, and it doesn't appear to have sold, or at least not to anyone who wanted to keep it as a pub. In 1782, the Northampton Mercury described it as the late Black Lion, which implies that for a period it wasn't in use as a pub. From 1776, when that sale particulars are in the paper, until the 1850s, there are no references in the records to the Black Lion pub. The census returns for 1841 and 1851 shed a bit of light on what was happening. The occupants at that point were listed as George Cornfield Malster, and he was aged 85 in 1851, and his niece called Jane. And there's no mention in this period of any landlord, licensed victualler or innkeeper. So we think it was probably dormant for a while. This situation only changed with the transformation of the area around Marefair and Gold Street in the 19th century. And that's a map from 70 or so years later than the previous one, and shows that the great effects of Victorian development, principal of which is the castle station coming in on the site of the historic castle, and vast development of the gasworks, factories, tanneries, breweries, and housing for all the workers to supply labour to those places of work. And so that big development and the dragging of the centre of gravity a little bit back from the market square towards the station again, or at least the balancing of passers-by and economic activity back a little bit towards the station area, the castle area, led to the revival of the pub. So in 1859, it re-emerges. John Roddice advertises in the Northampton Mercury to inform, and I quote, his friends and the public generally that he has opened the above inn, where every accommodation will be afforded. Wines and spirits of the finest quality, good stabling and lock-up coach houses, home-brewed Burton and other ale. And under the management of John Roddice, the old Black Lion flourished, providing lavish dinners for societies and clubs in Northampton. An example is the Northampton Friendly Society, who had about 40 or 50 members sitting down to a dinner in the 1860s. At the gas fitters' annual meeting, fitters and others in the employ of the Northampton Gas Company sat down to, I quote, an excellent supper at the old Black Lion. And they said, it's needless to say justice was done to the good things provided by the worthy host, Mr. Roddice. After the usual loyal toasts, etc., the evening was spent in a choice selection of vocal and instrumental music by some of the company. Altogether, it was the most successful gathering hitherto held. The inn also provided refreshments for social gatherings further afield, such as fetes and garden parties and the Northampton races. In an advertisement in the Northampton Mercury in 1883, Mr. Roddice Jr., that's the original Mr. Roddice's son, quote, begs to inform his numerous friends and the public in general that he has taken the wooden stand on the racecourse, where he hopes to meet with the same patronage hitherto so kindly bestowed on him, wines, ales and spirits of the finest quality at bar prices. So this photograph is the oldest we have of the pub, and it shows it in its heyday. The name above the door is Amy Roddice, the widow of John Roddice, the first who opened the pub, and she carried on the license after his death in 1869. So a few features I'd like to draw your attention to. Here are the chimneys related to those chimney breasts that we saw on the previous plan when the frontage was rebuilt. There's the carriage arch taking you through to the stable yard. This is the little cottage next door, I think still a separate building at this point, and it has dormer windows in the attic, which are now lost. The door was here in the 1860s, 1870s, whilst now it's here. And you can see the windows have 16 panes of glass, because of course, plate glass at this point was very expensive. This is a more easy form of glass to produce. So that's the pub in its heyday. Now we know quite a lot about it in the 1880s and the functioning of the Victorian pub, because it was put for sale again in the 1881, sold to the Castle Brewery. And this sales particulars described the building, and you can see here Jen Dedman, our historic building consultant, has identified the rooms that are described in the description on the modern plan of the building. So here's the carriageway through here. This is where the door was at that point. And you can see, and we can correspond with the description, the house contains a large arched cellar for ale, and that's in the basement and exists to this day. Capital and well-accustomed front bar for retail trade, that's here. And a bar parlour overlooking the same, that's just up here. Then a commercial room and smoke room, kitchen, and larder. That's all on the ground floor. On the first floor, the description describes capital market or dining room capable of accommodating 60 persons, and that's the function room that still exists on the first floor, with small bar adjoining, large storeroom, nice drawing room, 4 bedrooms. Together with the large yard, and that's still here, having gateway entrances at back and at front. In the yard is stable accommodation, that's here and here, for 40 horses. So we've got a description which marries pretty accurately with the building as it survives to this day. So what did it look like in the yard? Here's a glimpse of the stable yard in probably the interwar period. And there's some lovely features that we can identify here. The cobbled sets on the surface. There's a horse tether just here. And in the building here, we found rings to tether horses and a manger. Similarly, in some of the stables along here. This photograph on the left is from the 1970s. It shows the same situation, but the cottage next door has become seriously dilapidated by this point. And this is probably close to the point when it became amalgamated into the pub, and the carriage arch there filled in to make one big bar space across the whole of the frontage. That happened, we think, in the 70s or 80s. It's in very poor condition at this point. This whole section here at the back of the little cottage at 3 Black Lion Hill was subsequently demolished. So we've got a big gap in that space at the moment. Another thing that happened subsequent to this photograph is a loo block. I think at this point, I understand from people who remember this time that gents' loos were in here. Not sure where the ladies were, but it was certainly a case of going out here to use the gents. A new modern loo block was built over the carriage arch at some point after this, rather ruining that rear elevation of the building. There's a photo of the front from the 1960s. Castle Brewery eventually became Phipps Brewery, and they owned the building in the 20th century. They added the brown tiles to the traditional Northampton ironstone elevation to the front that you can just see along here. They changed the sash windows into these leaded lights casement windows, and then they've subsequently actually changed back again into sash windows. The door by this stage is in its position as it is now. The carriage way doors have been closed, but shortly after this, as I say, the whole of the ground floor was amalgamated into one big space, and those little cosy rooms that we saw in the earlier plan opened out into open plan. Going out to a more bird's eye view, this is one of the few snapshots that we have of the back of the building here before the modern era. And you can just see what a densely developed part of Northampton this was, and how many people must have lived here, which of course kept the pub going. One of the nice features about this photo is you can see that there was a taking in bay for hay, because there was a hay loft in this part of the building in the stone gable end there. That gable end was taken down after the war and rebuilt, and the function room that's on this top floor here had loos put in at this end, so there are just 4 little windows for the loos on this main elevation now, when previously there was this rather nice industrial taking in bay for hay. So we're up to the present day, and you can see the same view roughly as it is now, and just how significant the second half of the 20th century has been for this part of Northampton town. Massive clearance of housing and demolition of Victorian and earlier buildings. Thankfully, some of the really important ones, Hazelrig House, St. Peter's Church, the Old Black Lion, Dr. Doddridge's Chapel, have survived. But in the place of a very dense, busy, lively urban townscape, we've got quite a lot of big open spaces, but unfortunately not ones that people choose to dwell in because of the dual carriageway, but instead car parks here and over here. And this has all led to challenges, both for St. Peter's Church and the Old Black Lion, of course, their decline, and in the case of St. Peter's Church, redundancy in the 1990s, I want to say. I think, and Jean will hopefully nod if I think I'm right, in the 1990s, is of course connected to that depopulation and changes in across the whole area, as well as other factors like people not going to church anymore. So what's the situation today? The pub is closed. It's been closed since 2018. The building is in a very poor condition. It's had a series of owners who haven't invested in the fabric. The last owner held it as an asset, but wasn't particularly interested in actively investing in it or supporting it. It's the first thing, one of the first things you see when you come out of the station on your way into Northampton town centre. And a derelict pub doesn't give an impression of the rich heritage and lively life of the town that people will discover as they go further along. But it's a shame they can't get a bit more of a sense of that straight away. Its dereliction has meant that it's been a focus of criminal activity since it closed. The freehold of the building is now owned not by the previous owners who didn't really invest in it, but is now owned by West Northamptonshire Council. And I'll come back to their important role in this project in a bit. St. Peter's Church next door, which is of course why the Churches Conservation Trust is taking such an interest in an old pub building, is harmed by the condition of the Old Black Lion, and that's partly why we are involved. You can see there the evidence of a break into the church where some stained glass was damaged in February of last year. Having a derelict pub next to the church rather than a lively pub with a good landlord or landlady, people coming and going, is a real problem for the church. It's a problem for the churchyard setting as well, which could be a really pleasant space, but isn't helped by the building next door. This is one of the most important buildings in our care and a really special place for Northampton, but the church is usually kept locked, and we'd much prefer to have it open on a daily basis and without a custodian. That is challenging because of the security issues. The church has other challenges, repairing it, the cost of utilities, the costs of conservation work are really, really high. And the church doesn't have a regular income. It's reliant on donations from visitors, which of course relates to the problem of it being closed, means there are fewer visitors and therefore fewer donations, and therefore it's harder to repair and conserve it. In some of our churches, we are able to put on lots of concerts and events, and we have loos or hospitality facilities. That's obviously made much easier. At St. Peter's, due to the extraordinary efforts of the Friends and of my colleague Karen Moore, who represents the CCT locally, a lot does happen, but it's seriously impacted by not having any loos or hospitality facilities. And it's really difficult to work out how you would provide those things within the envelope of the church, because it's such an important and significant building. I'm not going to go into the history of the church today. There's lots of opportunities to find out more about that this weekend at Heritage Open Days, but it's really hard to see how we provide loos or catering facilities within that church. It's just too special and important. So all these factors coming together led my predecessors at the Church's Conservation Trust some years ago to think, well, rather than trying to work out how to fit in a loo and a servery into this church, why don't we think about the derelict pub on our doorstep and try and regenerate two historic assets in tandem with each other. And that led really to the beginnings of the project, which I have to say is a new venture for the Church's Conservation Trust. We tend to keep our historic buildings open, repaired, and free to enter, but otherwise that's sort of the main thing that we do. We have never taken on a historic pub. Our commercial activities would tend to be around concerts and events within our churches. So this is a new venture for us, and one that we're really excited by. The ideas that I'm describing led to us making applications to various heritage funders, who I'll talk about later, and the project was born. I'll move on now to what we want the project to achieve and the future of the Old Black Lion. At the heart of the project is our idea about restoring the Old Black Lion as a proper pub. And by that, I mean a really popular public house, genuinely public, open to everyone at the centre of its community. So many pubs have closed, and they're such an important part of our heritage, just in the way that churches are. And recognising the heritage of this building as a pub is really important to our vision for it. Another strand of our vision for the Old Black Lion is, as our national office, we're a small charity that have up until now been headquartered in London. Very few of our staff actually based in London, and obviously that's expensive. We want to spend our members and the money that we receive from the government and from the church commissioners better. And so we don't think a London office is necessarily a good use of that money. So we're looking at moving to Northampton to a building next to one of our sites where we can showcase the work that we do on the first floor of the Old Black Lion. The third strand to our vision for the future of this pub is the Central Council of Church Bell Ringers, who support bell ringing teams across the country, who are obviously an important part of church heritage. They're a sort of living heritage, if you like, of bell ringing. And they're interested in hiring one of the stable yard buildings as a national training centre where they can teach new ringers how to ring and hopefully introduce more young people to bell ringing. This is all possible because we were successful in applying for a National Lottery Heritage Fund Enterprise Grant in 2016. And that brought with it £1.8 million worth of funding, which is the absolute lion's share. Other funders are West Northamptonshire Council, the Architectural Heritage Fund, and the West Northamptonshire Development Corporation, when it was around, gave us some funds as well, which were all highly significant. I just want to dwell a little bit on West Northamptonshire Council's role here, because it has been a game changer. Them buying the pub when they did, that was one of was a really important move because we were struggling to work out how to achieve all this with the existing owner of the pub as was. West Northamptonshire purchased the building, and the intention is, and we're in the final stages of discussing that with them, is that we're going to take a long lease on the building. We're not pub operators ourselves. We are good at community work in historic churches and conservation of historic churches, but we don't pretend to know how to run a pub. So we would be leasing the ground floor commercial aspects of the building to a pub operator. West Northamptonshire Council's contribution is also financial, around £465,000 worth of funding, the vast majority of which has come through the Towns Fund. That's direct from the Treasury as part of the Towns Fund deal. And the Council's also looking at furthering proposals for new development on the site opposite the pub, and exploring the possibility of a heritage park, considering the whole character of this area, which is known as the Heritage Gateway to the town. So a little glimpse at some of the plans here, for which we received planning permission earlier this year. So this is at the front elevation as it will be, and we hope not too many major changes from what is there at the moment. But the key thing we're most excited about is the reopening of the carriage arch here. There you can see it with the timber doors, the traditional timber doors closed as it would be at night, and there with the doors pinned back inside the reveals there, and a glazed partition door there, so you can see right through to the stable yard. And this will be the kind of big main entrance to the new venue. So you would come through this glazed entrance, and the stable yard will be a place with seats here for outdoor dining and drinking. And then these are the old stable doors, all preserved intact. There's a proposal as well to have steps and a little entrance into the churchyard at the south end of the building, so building those connections between the two. So if an event is going on in the church, which we hope will, a concert, people can come over here before or after and come into the pub and enter this way for a drink. The CCT's offices entrance will be here, and this one of the stable doors right there. And then this is further out at the back. This is from St. Peter's Street, so you can see through into the stable yard, the new steps going up to the churchyard, and you can see there we've reinstated that idea of the hayloft in that gable end, but this one, a big picture window to bring light into the old hayloft, which is going to be a function room for use by the community, by the publican for special events, and also by the CCT when we have all our staff together. So there'll be a substantial function room there with multiple uses. There's the border site plan. So there'll be that entranceway through here, beer garden here, the office entrances here, and that connection at the back between the church and the pub. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd have a lovely wedding in the church and people spilling out and then coming around here for a wedding breakfast. Then one of the other moves is to build a new dining room in this location here, where there were formerly buildings at the back of the cottage and now is empty, proposed for a little single-storey dining room there, which extends the trading area of the pub really significantly, and also just reinstates that horseshoe plan that exists right the way back in time in the pub. Here are the plans. This is the ground floor. As I've described, you come in at this main entrance here, although the secondary entrance at the top will still be available, particularly as there are steps here, and it'd be better to get step-free access through this way, although there is also a ramp coming up here, and people with mobility issues will be able to come in at this point. The idea is that it's very clear that if you want to have a meal, there's a dining room here with the open kitchen at this point, and that's the way you turn. But the area, the lounge and the bar and the snug, still very much more of a traditional pub offer, as as you'd expect with the bar here. The office entrance is just here separately from the pub entrance, and then you go straight up the stairs to where the office CCT offices will be. The loos here for the use of the pub and the function room above are in that location. This old coach house and stable is where the Central Council for Church bell ringers would have a electronic bell ring, where they would be able to teach people to do bell ringing. I understand you use headphones and it's entirely silent, although I understand it's very thirsty work, hence the excitement from them about being co-located in a public house. And then we've got a kitchen prep area and refuse here just to serve the open kitchen, which hopefully will add a bit of vibrancy and interest as you come along Marefair. Just on the first floor here, as you come up the stairs, this would be the function room here, and I would describe that big window that we're reinstating where the hayloft was. And as I say, this function room's very much multi-use for different groups in the community, as well as the pub for hire, and as well as by the CCT. And then the CCT offices are around this section here. Offices and meeting room and a kitchen. It's not a big office, but so many of us now tend to work near the churches that we look after. There's only actually a very small core staff, but they will be based here. And then we've got some loos here, and then the manager's apartment is at the bottom here, and that's the roof of the new dining room. So yeah, a bit of colour to add. These, of course, are just stock images, but they, I hope, convey what sort of place we want to create, and we're certainly seeking an operator who shares this vision. We want this to be a genuinely community orientated pub, the sort of place that you could go with your friends to celebrate a new job, or perhaps leaving a job, but also you could take your elderly aunt for a cup of tea in the afternoon, or your children for Sunday lunch. We want it to be multi-generational, multicultural, welcoming to everyone within the community. We want it to be a place where there's live music, where there are pub quizzes, where the events are supporting what's going on in the church. We want the pub to retake the place in Northampton life that it had in the 19th century, and be genuinely welcoming and open to all in a way that it probably wasn't so much in the 19th century. And we hope that is in connection with renewed life and activities at St. Peter's Church. There's images here of things that have happened in the past. As I say, the Friends of St. Peter's and my colleagues who work with St. Peter's Church put on an incredible programme of events, including carols at Christmas time and activities with children. This was a clay modelling session based on the Romanesque carvings, but it can be a struggle with the limited facilities that are there. And we hope that these kind of activities will happen much more frequently, and with much greater numbers welcomed. And of course, the big thing is taking away the security risk as well to St. Peter's caused by that empty building nearby. And we hope that our landlord or landlady will be able to keep an eye on the pub, and ideally on the church, and ideally open the building on a more regular basis. So final section, and this is just to talk about our discoveries so far. So we've just completed what's called an enabling works contract, which is stripping out some of the modern fixtures and finishings and preparing the site for the main building contract. And that's a ground floor plan showing the demolition of the modern toilet block, for example, on the back there, and other modern features. You can see there the photo of the rear of the building as it is very recently, now that that's all been taken down, and we're excited to see here the timber bressumer, the big timber beam there that marks where the old carriage arch was. So in due course that will be taken out and reinstated, so you'll be able to see straight through to Marefair. We're looking at repairing these beautiful Northampton ironstone elevations, which are caked in horrible acrylic paint, plastic paint, taking that off and allowing the traditional construction to breathe again. You can see here we've removed some asbestos lining to this 1960s staircase. And so that's the sort of first bit of work that we've been doing, and made some discoveries as part of that. For example, this is down in the churchyard along the side of the pub. So imagine here the church is up to the left, and the pub is on your right. We've done some archaeological investigations in the churchyard and discovered an old brick path going alongside the pub, that possibly was to an entrance in the pub in the side of the churchyard. More likely it was simply an area just to sort of keep the churchyard land off the earth off the pub wall, where it's been for more recently, and it's led to considerable damp. So you could see there was historically a wall here along the churchyard and a little path going along. So that was an exciting discovery last year made by our archaeologist, and we're hoping to reinstate that path and reveal it as part of the works, which will also allow that very damp wall to dry out, we hope. That asbestos staircase that I just showed you on the other slide, that's it inside. And then when we took away some of the modern plasterboard, we found a lovely old sash window in the elevation. It painted a vivid bright green. So that's going to now be incorporated in plans and retained. This is on the first floor. So we've taken out the modern loos. You can see in the old function room. And that's what it looks like now. Much more clear, and you're going to have some great views out to the churchyard through there as well. And then the other final discovery, going back to the plan, is in this little kitchen area here. A suite, probably early 19th century. It's a late Georgian basket grate, hob grate fireplace that was found behind modern plasterboard on these props that you can see along here. So again, we've changed our plans to accommodate that, and this will now feature in our new kitchen. So what's happening next? At the moment, the building contract for the main building works is out to tender. When we get that back, we'll know a bit more about what the final cost of the project's going to be, and we'll go to the National Lottery Heritage Fund with that for their formal permission to start in November. We'll then take it to the CCT's trustees board meeting in December for their approval of the building contract, and sign that hopefully by the end of the year. We're looking to start on site with the main building contract in January 2023, and we hope very much to welcome those of you who are able to visit to a hard hat tour or to an archaeology event in 2023. We're hoping for a grand opening of the pub with a new landlord or landlady and a programme of activities in 2024. Sooner, if you're really keen to come sooner, on Friday the church will be open for Heritage Open Days, as it will for subsequent weekends, this weekend and next weekend as well. But on Friday only, with West Northamptonshire Council, we'll be opening the gates at the back of the pub so people can come and have a look in the pub yard, and I'll be there to answer questions and talk about the project to anyone who comes along then. So there's an opportunity very soon to come and see what's going on. But I think you've probably had a fairly comprehensive summary there of what's happening, and I'd be really pleased to answer questions right now.